Hi, and welcome to the regularly scheduled podcast for Gordon Clark Discussions. This podcast is the official shop talk for the Gordon Clark Discussions Facebook group, focused on news and the latest discussion topics in social media, in addition to theology. I'm your host, the BFG, a.k.a. the big fan of Gordon Clark, a.k.a. Romans 9:18. Thank you for joining. First, a shout out to the people on social media, especially the Gordon Clark Discussions group. A link to our Facebook page is provided below. My thanks to our group's conversation starters, our rising stars, and our top contributors. Let's look at today's article. It references a video by Professor Donald Hoffman. Do we see reality as it is? Donald Hoffman starts the journey of his lecture with the element of mystery. How does our brain and mind relate to each other and to reality? He quotes Thomas Huxley, who basically says that we don't understand how they relate any more than we understand how a genie could come from a rubbed lamp. Brain activity and conscious experience are correlated, but the mystery is that we don't have underlying reasons why that should be. While critical of the professor's position in this essay, I do wish to be clear that his video is excellent, worthy of your time and consideration. He quickly gets to the heart of much of the main issues confronting both the secularist and the religious believer today. And he does so in a winsome and communicative way. For secular thinking, the dilemma illustrated by the professor in his opening is an example of the mind-body problem. Which for secularists is one of the most difficult problems in philosophy to reconcile. Secular physicalists, sometimes called materialists or naturalists, or some other terms, like to limit reality solely in the light of what can be scientifically and phenomenally demonstrated. And so they tend to deny a noumenal human soul. There is a terminology shift in their language. One goes from talking about the human soul to just the mind. From talking about the mind to just the brain. And so they eliminate the non-corporeal over time. And they reject the classic categories of spiritual thought, being, and identity. To capture this better, they sometimes use the label eliminative materialists and advocate for a form of scientism in which everything is explained in terms of impersonal, unguided, uncaused events and properties of physical matter that simply emerge as time passes by random, accidental events. By contrast, they tend to portray the non-physical concepts of the mind and soul as simply illusions used by the common folk to explain something that such folk don't understand very well. This kind of thinking is all the rage in secular intellectual circles. John Lennox wrote about how, as a young academic, an older, an accomplished scientist asked him the question. He said, "Lennox, do you want a career in science?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "Then," he said, "in front of witnesses tonight, you must give up this childish faith in God. If you do not, then it will cripple you intellectually, and you will suffer by comparison with your peers. You simply will not make it." Lennox reflects about this. Talk about pressure. He says, "I had never experienced anything like it before. I sat in the chair paralyzed and shocked by the effrontery and unexpectedness of the onslaught. I didn't really know what to say, but eventually I managed to blurt out, 'Sir, what have you got to offer me that is better than what I have got?' In response, he offered me the concept of creative evolution, put forward in 1907 by French philosopher Henri Bergson. And so we see the struggle and tension is real. Those who wish for science to be the last, the only, and the best tool for understanding reality, to the exclusion of all others, find that the concepts of reality is being grounded in the person of a creator God, or even, more generically, an intelligent designer, simply do not fit their impersonal philosophical commitments. And so, inquiries that involve the personal existence of agents must be dismissed, and opposing views must be made fun of, censured, mocked, and eliminated from the academy. But I digress. Back to Hoffman's video. He shares a thought experiment. Imagine that I am observing a red tomato about 1 meter away. If I close my eyes, my visual inputs change from the view of that red tomato to a gray background, presumably me looking at the back of my eyes. Is the tomato still there? In thinking about this, we learn the difference between reality as it truly is and the image of reality that we have that supposedly reflects it. The speaker has managed to introduce the basics of Kantian philosophy in a very germane and interesting way. Using the example of a particular species of beetles in Australia, he introduces the idea that our view of reality might not correctly reflect reality as it is, and that our understanding, concepts, and language of soul, while convenient language, nevertheless does not reflect the underlying ontological reality. And such language is nothing more than evolutionary hacks and tricks. He describes how in Australia, the introduction of brown beer bottles threatened this beetle's reproductive cycle, as the males confused the beer bottles and mistook them for female beetles, so that their male beetle common sense about mating and reproduction is shown to be nothing more than a clever hack. It is this inability to distinguish which illustrates how Hoffman believes that people similarly do not see reality for what it truly is. In this manner, he very adeptly gives us the cognitive crisis of the humanistic enlightenment. Since we cannot see things as they really are, but only as they appear to us, how can we know reality in any certain or true fashion? And why should science be the last, best, and only tool, since the very observation and measurements we ourselves make in this environment, according to the professor's thesis, do not reflect the underlying ontological reality? This line of reasoning seems to crush empiricism with the very skepticism that empiricism used to reject other philosophical methods. If the only information about reality was what our own senses provide to us, with no other assistance or modifying help, then aren't we just like those beetles, unable to distinguish between what is real and what is merely appearance? So Hoffman maintains we are stuck, but the scientist comes to our rescue and solves our dilemma by saying the word evolution, throwing up some equations, and declaring victory. The thesis that he offers is this. In simulated games where fitness and accurate perception of the world are examined, fitness for reproducing dominates. This is where the emergence of properties through random chance and time are supposed to do their magic. According to the professor, there is not only no advantage to having an accurate perception of the world, but for any given state of reproductive fitness, it seems that it is disadvantageous to perceive the world as it is. He concludes with what the equations of evolution are telling us is that all organisms, including us, are in the same boat as the beetle. We do not see reality as it is. Instead, we are shaped by tricks and hacks that keep us alive. Now, this is nothing more than the good old 19th century argument between the academics and the populists. The academics rejected dogmatic, common-sense assertions about realities and thought that such forms of thinking were outdated, old, that they were legend and myth, that they had no basis in reality, and were a hindrance to the new, forward-thinking, intellectual brights who knew better. I think Christians have heard this song before. He then goes on to offer a very interesting philosophical speculation. He offers what might just explain why cartoonish, common sense, evolutionary instinct is better than an accurate understanding about reality. He compares the idea of a virtual reality, such as we have experience with in our computer desktop, a reality which is not real and yet affords an intuitive interface to the real layer of the computer hardware. This virtual world assists limited human beings by giving us a cartoonish, simplistic understanding of reality instead of a much more detailed and accurate understanding of things as they are. We are walking simpletons and better for it. And he thinks we have the impersonal process of evolution to thank. He says, evolution has shaped us with perceptual symbols that are designed to keep us alive. We'd better take them seriously. If you see a snake, don't pick it up. If you see a cliff, don't jump off. They're designed to keep us safe, and we should take them seriously. This does not mean we should take them literally. That is a logical error. Later he says, regarding the tomato, there's something that exists when you don't look at it, but it's not space-time and physical objects. It's as hard for us to let go of the space-time and objects and the tomato as it is for the jewel beetle to let go of its bottle. We are blind to our own blindnesses, but we have an advantage over the jewel beetle, our science and technology. But the scientist has offered us a contradiction. Our appearances do not accurately reflect reality, nor do they give us the truth about the way things actually are. Yet in the very next breath, he advocates the use of science and technology, which by all accounts are limited to the appearances. The same appearances that fail to accurately reflect reality. Let's ask the question, why should a random simulation of games be considered better or more adequate of an explanation than intelligent and personal design? Why? We have to ask those who advocate that reality is ultimately impersonal. Why is an experiment involving 1 million monkeys frantically typing away and randomly producing a Shakespearean play after only 10 to the big number years a better result than saying a moral agent created it in just a short human lifetime of writing? At some point, it is more plausible to note that a personal agent is the better explanation, because we actually have historical evidence for such creations. We have Shakespeare, and we have his plays. the typing monkeys have yet to provide the same. Why not suppose it reasonable to refer to a noumenal creator to explain the existence and behavior of created beings in reality? The danger in being so sophisticated as this researcher is that you lose your hold on reality. And so we have a nation of sophisticated men and women who are now fighting over which bathroom is the right one to use. Even 50 years ago, people who didn't have science, but only just their common sense, knew that men were to use the men's restroom and women were to use the women's restroom. In today's generation of professors, they're not so sure. It's not the least bit clear that the newer, sophisticated ideas have led us any closer to the true nature of reality. I think this video is about as close to an admission of defeat as one could ever expect. Remember all the times physicalists said against religion's noumenal claims about reality that if it can't be perceived, if it can't be scientifically demonstrated, it is meaningless to talk about it. After decades and decades of rejecting the idea of a meaningful noumenal reality, scientists like Hoffman are backpedaling. It's a mistake, as even they themselves can admit, to limit one's understanding of reality solely to the phenomenal. But if that is so, then their last, best, and only tool, that is, science, being only phenomenal and not noumenal, has just failed them. The Bible gives a clear, specific, and satisfying answer to the explanation of why the behaviors of people and beetles are the way they are. They are creatures, the created product of an intelligent designer and master engineer, and he endows them with a bounty of creaturely knowledge about the world they live in. God grants a treasure of common sense to the honest. He is a shield to those who walk with integrity. He guards the paths of the just and protects those who are faithful to him. Then you will understand what is right, just, and fair, and you will find the right way to go. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will fill you with joy. Wise choices will watch over you. Understanding will keep you safe. The book of Proverbs, chapter 2, verses 7 to 11. For Gordon Clark Discussions, this is Romans 9:18.